Good afternoon. I'm Judy Huntington, the president of the College of New Rochelle. It is a privilege and an honor to host the governor here today to talk about his groundbreaking reforms designed to protect New Yorkers with disabilities and special needs. Today you'll hear from Clarence Sundrum, Special Advisor to Governor Cuomo on vulnerable persons, Kathy Salome, who is here to share her own family story, and finally, you'll hear from Governor Cuomo. But first, I'd like to acknowledge some special guests. Clarence Sundrum, Special Advisor on Vulnerable Persons. Kathy Salome, a mother. Senator Ruth Hassel Thompson. Senator Stuart Cousins. The following members of the New York State Assembly: George Latimer, Shelley Mayer, Amy Paulin, Robert Castelli, and Steve Katz. Also with us, Ken Jenkins, Chair, Westchester County Board of Legislators. And welcome all other local elected officials. Thank you all for joining us. There is no cause more notable, no duty more fundamental in government than protecting the health, safety, and welfare of vulnerable citizens. We are simply honored to have Governor Cuomo here with us today to announce new legislation that will provide the strongest, most consistent and comprehensive standards and practices in the nation for protecting those with special needs and disabilities, those who have no voice, those who are most vulnerable, and those who need special protection. This important legislation resonates with the mission at the College of New Rochelle, which for more than 100 years has been committed to service and ensuring social justice for the underserved populations. Our master's degrees in special education, nursing, long-term care administration, guidance and counseling, and mental health counseling are all grounded in the college's mission of education for service. These programs prepare students to become mental health and counseling professionals and educators for individuals, groups, and families. With this legislation, Governor Cuomo is setting a new standard of care and protection for our most susceptible populations. He's making New York a national model for government efficiency and responsibility as his administration begins to right a wrong that has existed for far too long. I would now like to introduce a national expert on the care of vulnerable persons, Clarence Sundrum, Special Advisor to Governor Cuomo.
Where's the clicker? Oh, here. Good morning, everybody. What we are here to talk about today is the conditions that affect over 1 million New Yorkers across the state. People who are served in over 273,000 residential beds, 11,700 program sites, and countless other non-residential programs. And these million people that we're talking about today all have families. So this issue that we are talking about today, the protection of vulnerable people, is one of profound and personal importance to a very large segment of our population. Our purpose in being here today is to talk about a piece of legislation, groundbreaking legislation, unprecedented legislation, that is going to ensure a consistent set of safeguards for vulnerable persons to protect them against abuse, neglect, and other dangerous conduct. We also need to focus on the fair treatment of employees upon whom all of us depend to execute government's responsibility for the care of vulnerable people. So This piece of legislation is going to have strong safeguards, aggressive investigation and prosecution of the small number of wrongdoers, and fair treatment of the larger group of employees upon whom all of us depend. Now, let me tell you what we're talking about. We're talking about people with mental illness, people with developmental disabilities, people who have substance abuse addictions, people who are just elderly and are living in different kinds of residential programs, children in residential schools or special education environments. When the governor asked me to look at this situation, I spent the last year studying how the state performs, and what I found is that there are rampant problems affecting the way in which the government executes its responsibilities. You've all read about the problem of abuse of vulnerable persons in care. There's been a consistent problem of having competent investigations when people make allegations of abuse and neglect. The state system has had difficulty in imposing discipline upon employees because of the convoluted process that exists currently. We have providers who rely upon state agencies to give them guidance who have been given confusing and inconsistent guidance. People who work on the front lines who are confronted with a dizzying array of directives that are so confusing that it's difficult for them to understand what is expected of them. One of the things I did was to look at the way in which 6 different state agencies address the issue of abuse and neglect and provide, either by law or by regulation, standards on how this problem should be dealt with. And what I found, and for those of you who can't read that, the important thing is a green symbol there means the policies are pretty good. The red symbol means that there's a black hole. There's no guidance. And what you see across these 6 state agencies that regulate group homes, that regulate adult care facilities, children's facilities, and so on, is a blinding array of confusion and incoherence. Some agencies define what abuse and neglect is, others don't. Some set a clear standard for investigations, others don't. Some have a time frame within which investigations need to be completed, others don't. Some have a requirement for trained investigators, others don't. Some require that the investigator report back to a state agency, others don't. Some require looking at patterns and trends of reports, others don't. So, the simple, I guess in a nutshell, what we are trying to do is to make a clear and consistent set of standards across state government so that this graphic will turn from this patchwork quilt to a totally green and consistent set of guidance. The legislation that the governor is proposing accomplishes 5 major goals. First, it creates a standard set of definitions of abuse and neglect across all of these state agencies, so the current inconsistencies would be removed. The second, and this is the centerpiece of this legislation, is it creates a justice center for vulnerable persons that would be the focal point of the state's efforts to protect vulnerable persons in all of our programs and services. Third, it implements the policy of proportional and progressive discipline, where we're going to be aggressive and firm with the people who commit serious abuse. We're going to prosecute them when they need to be prosecuted for committing crimes, but we're going to be fair in the treatment of people who make lesser lapses of judgment in their execution of their responsibilities. We're going to strengthen the laws that protect people with vulnerable persons who are in our care by enacting new criminal penalties and raising penalties for some of the existing crimes. We're going to consolidate background checks. So the current system where you have 6 different agencies with different sets of requirements for how background checks are conducted, and employees who've got to get multiple background checks to work in the same agency because 2 of their programs are licensed by 2 different state agencies, we're going to put an end to that. And finally, we need to restore public trust in these systems. So transparency is a very important goal of this legislation. The definition of abuse and neglect is going to address the obvious things that you would expect to see: physical and sexual abuse, inappropriate use of restraint, aversive conditioning, and so on. Importantly, it will also treat the failure to report abuse and neglect, or a supervisory failure to act upon reports of abuse and neglect, as a very serious matter that requires discipline. The Justice Center, which, as I said, is the centerpiece of this legislation, is going to operate a 24-hour hotline where persons can call in complaints. And one of the things we've heard about is a fear of reprisals that is experienced both by individuals who are being served, by their families, and sometimes for the frontline staff. We're going to create an option for them to make a call to a toll-free hotline that is manned 24 hours a day, that will have trained staff there who can identify conduct that's criminal and make a referral to a law enforcement agency for investigation and prosecution. But the Justice Center will also have its own prosecutorial authority that will run concurrently with the district attorney. So particularly in the rural parts of the state where there's not the capacity to deal with these complex cases, the Justice Center will have the resource to investigate and prosecute these cases. Importantly, it will also prosecute cases of employee discipline in the state system. So the current problem that we have right now, where we send labor relations representatives to do battle with lawyers for the employees, we're going to have a more evenly matched playing field. This Justice Center would also have a register where people who are found guilty of serious abuse or repeated abuse are going to be put on a register, and that register is going to cut across all of the state agencies. It's not going to be like some of the registers we currently have, which affect one program. And if you get put on that register, you can cross the street and go to work for another program. We're going to put an end to that by having a single register for human services. And once you're on that register for serious and egregious offenses or repeated offenses, you will be banned from working with vulnerable people ever again. The Justice Center is also going to absorb the state functions of the Commission on Quality of Care, and that oversight, which currently is limited to mental hygiene agencies, is going to be extended to the other agencies, the Department of Health's adult home programs, the SED residential schools, and so on. An important part of the mission here is to have a clear and unambiguous code of conduct to guide employees in their conduct on a day-to-day basis. And that code of conduct is going to be applicable to the entire field, and employees will be required to sign an acknowledgement that they know the code of conduct, they understand their obligations, and they're going to be held accountable to it. We're also going to have common standards for investigations, so there's no longer going to be a situation where whichever employee happens to be available is assigned to do an investigation. I talked earlier about the need to make a distinction between serious transgressions and the normal lapses that sometimes occur in the workplace. So there is going to be differential treatment between those serious transgressions and repeated misconduct and the lesser offenses that require progressive discipline, employee training, and more importantly, the correction of underlying problems in the workplace that may be causing or contributing to the types of problems that we see. The strengthening of the laws is going to include two major initiatives. One is to pass a statute that makes sexual activity between staff and residents of a facility a crime. So we no longer would have to prove that there's a lack of consent. The relationship itself and the disproportionate power between an employee and a staff person would be sufficient to establish it. We're going to strengthen the laws dealing with abuse of vulnerable persons in residential care. Consolidating the background checks. I mentioned that we have programs that may have an employee that has 2 or 3 different background checks being done for different programs that they operate. This is wasteful, it is duplicative, it is expensive. The Justice Center is going to serve as a clearinghouse of background checks. We're going to have one standard for performing background checks, and 1 background check per person ought to be enough. Transparency is critically important. All of you are aware that over the last 35 years, the trend in services for people with special needs has been for the state to reduce its role, and for most of these services today being provided by nonprofit agencies and private organizations. And that trend is going to continue under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Olmstead requirements. So it makes no sense to have a law that applies the freedom of information principles to state agencies, but the vast majority of people who are served are not covered by the freedom of information law. So we're going to extend the principles of the freedom of information law to nonprofit agencies with respect to their abuse and neglect cases, and they would be subject to it to the same extent that the state is. There are two other critical elements of transparency. One is on the individual cases. Incident review committees that review investigations of serious incidents are going to be required to open up their membership to representatives of families, consumers, and advocates. So it's not going to be a sealed up process that nobody knows anything about. And finally, the Justice Center is going to make an annual report to the governor and the legislature, which will also be made public, on what exactly is being reported. Where are the reports coming from? What are the recurrent problems? Are there recommendations for how we continually improve and fix the systems on which 1 million New Yorkers and their families depend? So this is what the Justice Center would cover. It's going to be the center of 6 different large state agencies that provide services to people with special needs. One other aspect is the Commission on Quality of Care currently has the protection and advocacy program that is established by federal law. A few days ago, the governor took the first step to designate a new nonprofit entity to be responsible for protection and advocacy and to give it a greater degree of independence than it currently has. With this action, New York will join most of the other states that currently have nonprofit agencies performing this function under federal law. So this is a very tall order, a very substantial piece of legislation, and the governor has shown remarkable leadership in putting before us what I can say without reservation is one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation that I've seen in 35 years that I've been in this business. It is staggering in its breadth, in its scope, in the extent to which it gets at the heart of the problems that affect people with disabilities. The governor has laid the idea before us. Now it's up to the rest of us to get engaged in the process of making our voices heard by those who count and who have to act upon the legislation that the governor has proposed. So, thank you all very much. I would like to, at this point, introduce Kathy Salome, who will come up here to share her experiences in services in this system.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Governor Cuomo, for inviting me to tell my story here today. My name is Kathy Salome. I am from Rye, New York. My son, David, who is 35 years old, was brain damaged at birth. He was diagnosed with a bipolar disorder when he was 11. He has lived in a state-run house in Westchester for the last 13 years. As he grew older, he lost control of his behavior and his aggression. But with medication and behavioral therapy, he became manageable and capable of learning. He also has a great sense of humor. David entered Hudson House in Lower Westchester County in 1998. At the time, the staff turnover seemed like a revolving door. It didn't provide consistency for David. David went through some horrific experiences, including being sexually molested when he was hospitalized. He also had difficulty with medication, and one of the medications produced a shutdown of his muscular control and a grand mal seizure. At this time of these occurrences, I knew where to turn, but I didn't know who could help my son. Sometimes I think that maybe people that could help me couldn't even do that job. But the worst incident to try and come to terms with was the injury at the hands of someone who was supposed to be caring for him. One day, David became agitated because a staff member who was not following guidelines that had been established for him responded to him in a negative fashion. David rushed at her and grabbed her by the hair. The staff member retaliated by scratching the sides of his face with her fingernails. I was told by the staff member that she had done nothing to provoke David, but she never told me how she had retaliated, nor that my son had been injured in the process. When I saw him, I was appalled. The scratches on the side of his face had become infected, and they had not taken him at that time to the doctor. I filed abuse charges with this, and the staff member was temporarily removed for 1 month. After the investigation that lasted 15 months, they dismissed the charges because there were no witnesses, and my son's injuries weren't serious enough. The suffering that David has endured and the process that we went through is unacceptable. This is why we need the Justice Center. This is why we need to tell patients, advocates, parents, staff about the 24-hour hotline. Employees, database, and support system that are included in Governor Cuomo's legislation. And I do thank you for that. But the governor is taking steps possible to make sure that David and people like him are protected from abuse and neglect. I thank the governor again and for the dedication to bringing justice for all. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First, to the College of New Rochelle, thank you for the hospitality. Thank you for letting us come and disrupt your school year. Let's give them a big round of applause, College of New Rochelle. Madam President, thank you for your hospitality and your courtesy and your kind words. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to the President. Clarence Sundrum, who did the report after spending months doing an investigation and research on the state side, is probably the foremost expert in the nation in this area. And he did every person in the state of New York a true kindness when he agreed to come and take a look at this problem for us. His research is impeccable. His credibility really leads the way, and we're very grateful that he did this for the state. Clarence Sundrum. And to you, Kathy, I know it's not easy for you to come and tell that story and share the information and have to go through it again and relive it again. But we know that you tell that story and you relay your story so that other people don't have to go through what you went through. And that's very big of you, and it's kind of you, and it's courageous of you, and we thank you. Kathy, thank you very much. And the President introduced my colleagues, but allow me to do it one more time, because we've had a banner year in Albany this year, and last year we had a very good year. And we did it by working together. There's no complicated formula. You have the governor, you have the Assembly, you have the Senate, And for many years, they were at odds, and they were fighting amongst themselves. And many years, their politics came first. And you had Democrats, and you had Republicans, and it was all political, and very little actually got done. We've taken a different path these 2 years. And basically, we've said, look, we're Democrats, we're Republicans, but we're New Yorkers first. And we're going to put the politics aside and leave the politics at the door, and we're going to do what's in the best interest of the people of this state. And this state legislature has worked, and I credit my colleagues in the Assembly and the Senate because they are the ones who did it. And let me ask them to stand one more time. Senator Ruth Hassel Thompson, Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins, Assemblyman George Latimer, Assemblyman Shelley Mayer. Why don't you all stand? Assemblyman Robert Costelli, my Assemblyman. Let's give you a round of applause. Stand up. And on this issue, you heard all the facts. I've been governor for 17 months. And for most of those 17 months, we've been trying to undo the damage that was done from years of apathy and neglect in the state government. And most of what we've been focusing on has been on the economic side and trying to get the state's budget in shape and the state's economy in shape. And we've spent a lot of time on taxes, something everyone in this room knows about. We passed the property tax cap to try to control taxes. We tried to reform the state's pension system. We reduced income taxes for middle-class employees, and we spent a lot of time doing that. And that was a priority, the state's economy, jobs, how much people are paying in taxes. This is on the 180 degrees from that. This is on the exact opposite side of what the state does. And we spent all that time on the budget. I could argue that this is more important and more valuable than any of the economics we've dealt with, because here we're dealing with human beings and with safety and with the way we treat one another. One of the main responsibilities for the state, what does the state do? One of the main responsibilities is the state takes care of people who are mentally ill or people with special needs. How we do that is after Willowbrook, at one time the state maintained large mental health facilities, large institutions. And in the 50s and the 60s, there was a revelation that those large institutions weren't appropriate. So the new wave, the reform was, we'll move out of the large institutions into smaller, more discrete, community-based facilities. It was the right idea. You then went from fewer, larger institutions to more smaller institutions. And we built an amazing complex of smaller facilities all across the state. That brought with it another set of challenges. You now had management challenges and staffing challenges because you had to manage and supervise multiple facilities all across the state. There have been problems. There have been problems for years. We have over 1 million people in these facilities. 1 million people. Some run by the state, some run by not-for-profit organizations and supervised by the state. But we have had a terrible number of complaints. Last year alone, 10,000 complaints of physical abuse or sexual abuse. Think about that. 10,000 complaints. These are difficult facilities to run. It is a population that poses challenges. Most of the workers, 99% of the workers, do an extraordinarily great job and really do the Lord's work. But there are employees who also break the rules and violate rights. I'm sure of that also. This situation has gone on for a long time. And what we're saying today is it has to end, and it has to end now. And sometimes the solution is very complex. Sometimes the solution is very simple. And in this situation, the solution can be said in one word. What do we want? We want justice. We want justice. The answer is a justice center. We want what's right. We want people to be treated fairly. We want people to be treated with dignity. We want people to be safe. We want people, you should applaud. We want parents or family members like Kathy who put their child or their loved one in a facility that is run by the state or managed by the state. We want them to be able to sleep at night and know that their loved one is in a safe, secure place. And I want to be a governor who balances the books, and I want to be a governor who works well with the legislature and does a lot of good things. But I insist on being a governor who treats every person in the state's care with basic human dignity. And that's what the Justice Center is. It has two sides to it. It has a criminal enforcement side and an administrative enforcement side. It sets up what's called a special prosecutor, basically another district attorney, to focus just on the problems in these facilities and for this population. These are very difficult cases to make. And the existing district attorneys, every county has a district attorney, find these cases very difficult because they are difficult. I used to be an assistant district attorney. I was the attorney general. I'm telling you, these are difficult cases to make. Then let's set up a special prosecutor who specializes just in these types of cases and this population. And on the other side is an administrative function, where if an action isn't criminal, but there is an allegation of abuse against an employee, there will be a justice center that will hear that complaint, find the facts, and treat it accordingly. We are taking actions now on the state side where we are terminating 200 state employees after we have found that they abused patients. I don't feel good about terminating 200 employees. I don't. But I will not allow a patient in the care of this state to be abused, period. And that's the message we send. Now, we have proposed this law, and we sent it to the legislature. We have 7 weeks left in the legislative session. 7 weeks left is a relatively short period of time. The end of 7 weeks, the legislature goes out of session, is the expression, for the summer. And then they don't come back until next January. So we either pass this law in the next 7 weeks, or we have to wait until next January when the legislature comes back, and then I have to put it in again next year. My position is this. I want this law passed, and I want this law passed now. 7 weeks. Seven weeks is plenty of time. Plenty of time. I know it's a complicated matter, but it's not that complicated. It really isn't. I was speaking to a person from the legislature about this bill the other day, and they said, well, you know, it's only 7 weeks and the devil is in the details. I said, no, on this one, the devil isn't in the details. On this one, the devil is in the abuse, and the devil is in the delay. Pass the bill. Pass it now. Let's do justice. It has been years and years and years. And 1 year, to wait 1 year to pass this law, 1 year sounds like a short period of time. If you are in a situation where you're being abused, 1 year is a lifetime. If you're in a situation where you've been abused year after year after year, it is a constant torment. We're going to pass this law, and I'll tell you how we're going to pass the law. You're going to get the law passed. You know why? Because democracy works when the people get involved. You make your voice heard, and we will pass this law. You do what you have to do, and I will do what I have to do, and we will bring justice to this state's mental health system, and we will do it in the next 7 weeks if you stand up and make your voice heard. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Governor Cuomo. Thank you all for being here today. This concludes our program. I'd like to thank the governor once again for visiting the College of New Rochelle, and I thank him personally for taking the initiative to defend and protect those with special needs and disabilities. Thank you, Governor Cuomo.